This is your host, Marisol, a freedom lifestyle consultant, bringing you an episode of Roaming the Now, where expat entrepreneurs, coaches, and mentors come together to give you a behind the scenes look at the real and raw experience of what it actually means to set out to a new country and build a life abroad. On this episode of Roaming the Now, we will be learning from Jill Valentine in exploring reverse culture shock, specifically what happens when you're abroad and then you come back home. What are some tools that you can use when you come back home, and just the importance of being aware of the feelings that come up. We'll also be exploring this really cool idea of the triangle effect, which definitely applies to you if you are someone who's moved abroad and then returned back home. You can tune into minute 1237 if you're really interested in that. Enjoy! Hello and welcome to Roaming the Now. This is your host, Marisol. And today I have Jill Valentine with me. Jill, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Awesome. So I'm so happy to be here. My name is Jill Valentine. I am the co-founder and transformational travel and life purpose coach at UGO Impact. And basically, I have been running transformational travel programs for the past about 7 years or so, which are basically life coaching plus volunteering abroad experiences. I found both of those things to be extremely transformative experiences separately. And so the idea of bringing them together to create incredible, profound change for my clients, as well as social change for the communities we work in, just made a ton of sense for me. So, yeah, I help my clients find clarity, confidence, and community to create change in their lives and get unstuck, live happier, more meaningful lives. And we work with amazing communities around the world that are, looking for a partner to help elevate their programming.
Amazing. What stood out to me, because Jill, we had a chance to connect around your coaching and your program, is literally travel is like a required portion of it. And so I would love for you to share a little bit more of what is the story of why you decided to create a coaching business, and the services that you provide are literally like travel is a non-negotiable part of it, right?
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, I've always been, an avid humanitarian. I bounced around from a bunch of nonprofit jobs and charity jobs, but I was still seeking like a deeper, more meaningful, way to reach my potential and make the impact I wanted to in the world. And I actually, on three different occasions, spent time volunteering and living abroad, and it was extremely profound and really incredible. And when I came back from one of them, which was living in Uganda for a year doing disability sport development, I just came home and I felt really unhappy and unsettled. And I knew I couldn't sort of go back to the life I was living, a 9 to 5 in the charity world again until I figured something else out. And I actually decided to become a life coach. And through that program, I discovered so much about myself and so much related to my experiences abroad. I had also lived in Tanzania previous to that, and again, done some volunteering there too. And I just, really came to see how powerful life coaching was and really, really understand, my gosh, how these experiences abroad had really changed my life, but how I actually didn't really have the tools to process how they had changed my life at the time and to really leverage them for the transformative opportunities that they were. And so I spent a month in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan, volunteering, helping rebuild, but also at the same time engaging with and interviewing some of the volunteers there about their experiences, their personal journeys, and everything. And it was just so fascinating to see the struggles they were having. How are they going to return home after this profound experience? Seeing that they were having, you know, these epiphanies and changes of perspective and everything, but also seeing that they weren't really able to verbalize it or really able to deeply understand it. And that's when I thought, oh my goodness, travel abroad, especially volunteering, and having a container to process that, like life coaching, is just such an extraordinary opportunity for growth and change. And at the same time, making a difference in the world, which is something I'm super passionate about. And so it just was like a no-brainer that this was what I was going to spend my life doing, and being in service to both people looking to make a difference in the world, as well as the change makers and local communities that we were working with.
Yes, I love it. I think that's so cool. Like the focus on community and also the focus on integration. Because like when I hear you describing the process of like, so what happens when you return after being, abroad doing really impactful, meaningful work, right? And then you come back
Hmm.
home and you're like, well, wait, what am I doing? So I would love for you to share just a little bit more around like the integration process. Like when someone is, abroad for a long time and then they come back home based in your like area of work and expertise, like what does that really look like? And what do you think are the tools that people like are usually missing when they come back?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the big tools, I say tools that they're missing, is that they haven't really processed what they just experienced abroad. They go, they have this, you know, profound experience. They go through their day to day, they help, they serve, they travel, they meet new people, they see new things, new scents, new sights. Literally their entire body is like ripe for this shift in perspective and everything like that. And then they kind of come home and are now sort of back to where everything is the same, but they've somehow changed. And for so many of the people that sort of travel abroad or volunteer abroad or live abroad, they come home and they literally are like, I don't actually know, or I can't actually verbalize what has changed within me. They're like, I know I feel different. And, their families are usually like, what's going on? You're all weird. You're all strange. You're changed. And they don't know exactly how to express that. And they themselves aren't even fully aware of the extent of the shift that's taken within them. And so for me, the coming home piece is sort of such a vital piece of this personal journey. Um, and a lot of it is the doing some of the work of self awareness while you're there, looking at your values. What are you enjoying? What's happening in your life while you're abroad that's different? Like simple questions that's different from at home. And why are you either maybe enjoying it? Why is it more fulfilling? What's present here that's not present at home? And then the same when we come home, you know, opening ourselves up to be aware of the feelings that are coming up. Some of us get triggered by people, being less grateful because we've had this profound experience and come home with such gratitude for our lives. And then we're like irritable around people who, are talking about, how the bus is 5 minutes late. And you're like, oh my gosh, do you know what I saw? Like people without homes, and you're complaining about your bus being late. Being aware of sort of these reactions and responses that we're having and understanding where they come from. So if you do a little bit of self-discovery, and that's the kind of stuff we do, the coaching exercises, we, dive in and look into sort of what's coming up for us, what feelings, what emotions, what thoughts, then you're able to go home and express that to your partners. You're able to say, hey, while I was abroad, I actually discovered that, these are my values in life, and they're not really as present here as I'd hoped. And so I'm actually looking to foster those more in my life. Or you're like, hey, I discovered these things are really important to me. And so I find that, when we hang out with our friends and they're still talking about these things, they seem frivolous to me now, and that can change in time. It's always very heightened right when you return home, and you kind of often sort of recalibrate. But just that awareness piece, taking the time to think about like, what are the feelings coming up? Who was I while I was abroad that I can bring home with me? Usually we're more free, we're more confident, we're more courageous, ready to take on adventure, get out of our comfort zones. And then we kind of come home and we don't feel as free, and we're constrained again by our lives, by our jobs, our family commitments, our family's expectations, people's view of us. We kind of come back and fit ourselves back into the mold, or try to fit ourselves back into a mold which existed before we went and changed. And understanding that you've changed and that you are going to be different, and giving yourself sort of some compassion around that and some patience around readjusting home and having what's called reverse culture shock. And expressing that to your family and friends, letting them know the changes that have come up, the learnings that you've had. And the more you can understand it, the more they can understand it, because you can share it with them instead of them just being like, "You're all weird since you got home. I don't know. You're all whatever, and I don't know what's happening, and why do you seem distant or why do you seem, strange or not caring about these things you used to care about?" Being able to express that is so important. And one of the big things that we really struggle with is it is such a shock. You're immersed in this culture while you're abroad with people and new connections and a different way of life, and then you come home and it can be really hard and you can miss. I mean, a lot of people will miss a lot of those things. And so one of the things I encourage is staying in touch as much as you can with either the people or the community that you lived in, staying in contact and kind of helping with that readjustment period back. And whether that's looking through photos a lot or videos, having video calls with people that you had connected with back wherever you lived or, volunteered. Um, and like I said, giving yourself grace, grace and time, it is a readjustment back. And seeing what you can shift in your life to make your present life more like the things that you maybe enjoyed and experienced and found yourself like, oh, I want more freedom. Awesome. How can you create more freedom here at home? Or I had such incredible community, which we often do when we live abroad, especially if there's an expat community or often the locals maybe live in a much more community tight kind of environment, village kind of living. You come home to your sort of like home with just your partner and your kids and you barely see anyone through the week and you're used to action and all of that. And so yeah, realizing that there is this adjustment phase and giving yourself sort of that grace and that time.
Yeah, I resonate that a lot because when we were talking, I remember sharing with you the last time, one of the last like few times I went back to the US, I remember just being like, what am I doing here? Granted,
Mm,
I was going back with the intention of returning back to Mexico, and that was when I was still waiting for my visa to process. But I just remember when I would get there, and about a weekend, I was just like, what am I doing here? Like I don't know what I'm doing here.
yeah,
Like I don't like life is just so it is the reverse culture shock. It's like it's so different. Like everyone's in a hurry. Like where's the smile? Where's the good day? And I and I just remember thinking, wow, like this is really weird. So this is no longer what I consider to be normal for me, right? Like I probably back in when before I moved, if you would have been like, oh, like, no one says good morning, that probably would have been normal. But like now where I live, no, you say buenos dias, like you say hello, like you greet someone in the morning. Like the whole idea of like, conversationing and spending time with the community and the locals back when I was living in the US, I've probably been like, what? What do you mean? Like I have my friends that I work with, right? And like that's it. But here
very
it's
much.
much so who's in your community? Do you talk to your neighbors? Do you connect with your neighbors? Do you support them? And so it's kind of this like it's just this very different perspective. And as you said, it really is that reverse culture shock because you're just kind of like, this is a weird place to be. Like I've never been here before. So what is that? I love that you put a name to it because I don't even think people realize like we know culture shock, but we don't know reverse culture shock.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, when we'd spoken before, there is this idea, it's called sort of this like triangle effect where you live, everyone circles. And where you travel, maybe everybody squares. And when you go, you end up being a triangle because you travel abroad, you live somewhere, and then you return. And you're not a circle anymore, and you're not a square. You're someone who has experienced both of these cultures and returned home, and you are different. And you are different for the fact that you have traveled abroad. You're now a triangle. You're like, I've had these experiences and you've picked up maybe some of the ways and values and behaviors from this square society, and you're now living with circles, but you're like, but I'm kind of a triangle. And it's hard to relate to circles. It's even hard to relate to squares because when you're living there, you're maybe an expat and you're not a local, and that's different. And then you go back and you're an expat having returned home, and that's different. And we just have to be very aware. Profound changes happen when we live abroad, when we live in other cultures, when we remove ourselves from our, everyday routine and familiar life, family expectations. shifts happen. Even just naturally, your own growth will happen. Even if you go somewhere, um, even within your own country, there's going to be changes, and then you're going to come home to this sort of sameness, and you're going to feel different. And it's okay. I think that's the big thing to really understand. It's okay. And some of your friends and colleagues might look at you funny and might, find you different and change. It's okay that you've changed. And the more you can communicate about it, let people know. Um, and like I said, I think one of the big things is doing things with intention. If you've come home and you're feeling unsettled, being intentional about like, what was it that I can bring here? Or am I just going to move back? Like, am I going to move back to the place that I had this great experience? Like, that's what I experienced when I came home from Uganda. I really wasn't happy back in Toronto. And I was like, well, here's my options. I either move back to Uganda, which wasn't really feasible. I was planning on having a kid and wanted to raise, them with my family and everything. Or I make my life happy here and I foster the things that were so present, like adventure and freedom and purpose and community that I had that made me happy in Uganda. I foster those here. And that is what I have done. I love my life now here. I have all of those things, but I didn't have them before I left. But I did recognize while I was gone, oh my gosh, I'm happy. How can I make myself happy back here where I'm now choosing to? I mean, wherever we live, you want to foster the things that make you happy. And sometimes you don't feel there is presence maybe in your community. Like sometimes community is harder to foster somewhere because of, the natural lay of the land, the urban setting that you live in, whatever it might be. But again, that doesn't mean it's impossible. It might just be more challenging if there isn't, an expat community. I live in Toronto. There isn't really an expat. Everybody's from everywhere. Like it's just, there's just multiculturalism and it's amazing and there's just a whole mishmash of awesome people, whereas when I lived in Uganda for the year, there were a ton of expats, and because they lived there without family and other friends, there was just every weekend you knew you were kind of hanging with certain friends, and then we got in with a local frisbee community with a bunch of locals, and that was awesome. But it was just so different to come back home and not have the natural, like, oh, we're just going to see everyone on the weekends because everyone just goes to one of a handful of bars or clubs. Now my friends were like all over the place and going at different places, and my family was here, and I was pulled in a million directions and had to be really intentional about creating that community feeling for myself.
Yeah. I really love how you're like, it's inspiring to see how like you took the learnings of what your values are and what's really important to you and you created that at home. And I think that that's where a lot of individuals or people kind of get like lost in translation. Like they feel like it's not possible. And sometimes it's really not possible. And that's why you said maybe you need to move back.
Yep.
Because really sometimes it is though possible if you really think about your values and you get creative, right? And I think that that comes with the awareness. How can I create this for myself where technically I'm from and I actually am going to make this choice to stay here? But I think this really comes down to you are in choice, right? Like you're in choice of what you're going to do. And if you believe it's possible for you to recreate those values and some of those things that emulate those experiences you've had where you're going to land, like it is possible. But I do find that what happens is sometimes people don't think it's possible. They don't think it's possible to recreate that experience of really living in alignment with their values, where they're from. And so it causes this like perpetual traveler, I've noticed. They're always just like bam, 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 bam,
Yes.
bam.
Yes.
For me, for me, I did that when I like got to like moving around, trying different places. But I realized like, no, actually, I do want to like have a stable foundation. Like that was important to me. I like structure, and that was part of what traveling taught me about me. But I also did have an avenue where it was going to be easier for me to obtain citizenship, to live here legally, and not break any laws. So for
Yeah.
me, my route looked like more okay. I'm choosing this. This is available and accessible to me, and so I'm going to cultivate that here. But I definitely sometimes think like, huh, like if I were to go to back to the US, like what part of the US would I even go to? Yeah,
Mm.
I don't think I would go back to where I grew up. So what would that life even look like? I
Yeah.
sometimes get curious.
Yeah. And it is so true. And sometimes it isn't possible. Like if you're like, oh my gosh, I went somewhere and I lived, where there was mountains and adventure every day, And you're like, but my home is like massive urban sprawl, and you're like, I'm not going to be able to like get mountain biking or skiing or be in the water every day. That is a reality for you. Maybe you do need to then make a choice. If that's your highest value, maybe then you do need to make a choice to move somewhere that the geography lends itself to a life of outdoor adventure. But it's looking at that and knowing your values and thinking like, okay, what's more important here? Living close to whatever, my family that maybe lives in this urban setting, or the adventure. And sometimes we have to make hard choices because you can't create that lifestyle. And for those people that are like, I do want the thrill and the adventure of traveling, awesome. Like, go be a nomadic traveler, create a life. And I think that's amazing if that is what you want to do. And so there's no right or wrong here. And sometimes you're like, novelty is important. It is one of my values. Things changing, not having routine. I get that through entrepreneurship and through literally like because I take people abroad and I travel and stuff. But for others, like that's harder to do living in an urban setting, you know, whatever. And so the choice to go and live abroad and travel every, couple weeks and move and live in different cities, that's awesome. It's just about knowing your values and then choosing a life that makes you happy. And one of the other things that I find is really important, and we have like a sort of a hashtag, we say, wherever you go, there you are. And it's this idea of like, I am me no matter where in the world I am. And so I know I can be like, I can be happy if I'm, somewhere and I feel, when I'm in Tanzania and I'm having these experiences. But then I also know that's the same Jill that comes home. And yes, I can get caught up in some of the maybe Toronto vibes or, consumerism or whatever. But then if I come back to myself, I can sort of say, that's like Toronto pushing itself on me, or that's like external thing. I can still be me. I can still be the happy Jill that existed in Tanzania. I can still do that here. And again, that comes from like self-awareness and not being so location dependent. My sense of self isn't based on where I live, it's based on me being wherever I am. So that's just another kind of important thing. Traveling, doing that, but having a solid sense of yourself kind of makes it easier to be wherever you end up being.
Yeah, no, definitely. It goes to this idea that I was talking about. Like home for me, home is within me now. Like I've realized that home is inside of me. It's not location dependent. Like as long as I have cultivated a home within me and I do feel like safe in my surroundings on like a nervous system level, like I'm cool, like I'm good. And I think that that's like the whole idea. Wherever you go, there you are. Home is within you. So if home is within you, you can access that like at any time, no matter where you are in the world. And I really think that the self-awareness, being aware of your values, and just knowing how to, like, as you've even like as you were sharing, like knowing how to put those emotions in words is part of knowing how to build that home, is part of like checking in with yourself. And intentionality is something that through living in a quieter environment, I've really started to hone in on it. Like every day I'm waking up, what's the intention? What do I want to experience today? What do I want to do today? But that is something that we can practice no matter where we are. Like we don't have you don't have to be in the like quiet mountains like me. You could do that in the city. Like, you can do that in Toronto, like where you are. It's more of an intentional practice. It's more of like I'm making effort to be very intentional and conscious about the decisions that I'm making, and that influences what I'm experiencing.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah, I can live here and be like, I need more adventure. Cool. If I drive, a couple of hours north, I can be in beautiful Muskoka. Or I can get on a plane and go somewhere if I am getting itchy feet. Like, I'm aware of that. I have a child, so I can't just take off and do all the things at the moment. But it's just knowing yourself allows you to make the choices of like, where do I want to travel? When do I want to travel? How long do I want to travel for? Do I want to live abroad? Like, those are all things that the more you know yourself, what you're looking for out of life, what makes you happy out of life, your strengths, what you're capable of, all of that makes those kinds of decisions easier. And it makes them more conscious decisions, not fear based. You're not chasing something, you're choosing something consciously.
Living in choice. That's always something that I talk about, and for me it cause comes like for me it comes with this radical responsibility. Like I'm taking radical responsibility for the choices that I make because I know that that influences like everything that transpires like in the moment as well as after. So with that being said, what advice would you give to someone who is going abroad with the intention to return home at some point?
I would, one, before they're going abroad, I would be very intentional as to what do you want out of this abroad experience. Again, are you hoping to be in community? Are you hoping to, live purposely? Whatever. Have a sense of that and choose a destination and choose an experience. Is it for growth? Is it for relaxation? Is it for connection? And make sure you live intentionally in that year or long or whatever you do. Just live intentionally fostering the things. And then when you come home, be aware that you will have had this transformation. And if you can do some growth, self awareness, maybe get a life coach that can help you do some deep self exploration, especially as you transition back home. Um, so you understand who you became while you were abroad, the things that you loved about yourself, the things that you loved about where you were. And if you're coming home permanently, how can you foster those here? And how can you share your transformation? Like, what are the words literally that you could share with your loved ones so they understand any sort of transformation or differences that they're seeing in you upon return? Um, and yeah, giving yourself grace and time and staying as well connected as you can to those that you connected with while you transition back, because that will help a lot. Or with other people who have lived abroad, because that will help not feel so I'm alone in this transition back experience. um, Definitely there's lots of communities for people who have gone abroad, returned, traveler communities, things like that. Expat communities. um, so yeah, those are kinds of the key things. Again, lots of intentionality and awareness around the whole experience.
Yeah. I definitely think this highlights the whole idea like you don't have to go through it alone. Like you can have a coach help you through this. You can have a support of people who went through the same people, like sorry, who went through the same experience as you went through. You can have that support group, and I feel like that's kind of what happens. That was that. You come back and you're like, I have to go through this alone because like no one understands me, right? But that's like not the case. Like there are other people. There are other
Yes,
people like you, either online in a community, maybe local to you. Maybe there's even a local group, or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe it's expats living where you decided to stay and you can even connect with them. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Jill, and your work, because I really love the model that you created of transformational travel and coaching. Just, I love it. It's so inspiring. So if anyone wanted to get in contact with you, what is the best way?
so I can be found. We have a Facebook page, UGO Impact. So that's UGO Impact. Same, that's our Instagram handle, that's our LinkedIn. And I'm also there, I'm love if this is like up your alley, you just want to personally connect. I'm, Jill Valentine. I'm also on all the social media, and I'm always happy to connect on a personal level with people, especially if they're looking for someone to be like, oh my gosh, having that expat return experience, that kind of stuff. So yeah, and anybody's always welcome to DM me for more information about my coaching. I do both one-on-one coaching as well as running our Travel for Change programs, including um, you know 2024. We've got an amazing program that includes volunteering for a week in Tanzania and then climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, all part of the coaching program. So yeah.
It's like next level. Thank you again so much. Your story is super inspiring. And I will add Jill's bio and description and any links that she has for you in the description. So make sure you check that out. And until next time, this is Marisol, your host of Roaming the Now, signing off. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Until next time, make sure you check out the links in the description. You can join my newsletters where I send you tips and tricks on how to build a lifestyle of freedom. So, until our next episode, have fun, live in the present moment, and enjoy roaming the now wherever you are in the world.